Welcome back to another wonderful episode of Zag Talk. Today we're going to be chit-chatting with Michael Schneider, the founder and CEO of Streets for All. We'll be getting into how do you build a movement that sort of furthers public transit and complete streets and all the things we want to see, even in a city that's not always as open-minded to it as you'd want. But before that, hey Greg, hey Athena, what's up gang?
Hey, Jonah, don't you have a Herbivore around the corner here?
Oh, me? Thank you for shining it back on me. Yes,
It's like
Curvevore's
we're a month out here. What do you got
a little
here?
over a
What can we
month
look forward
out.
to?
We're just starting to announce our speakers as usual. I think we got some great names coming. I don't want to pick a favorite child, obviously, because that would be my real child. But a couple speakers I think are particularly interesting. We got CPUC's Pat Zen. She's the Deputy Executive Director of Consumer Policy, Transportation, and Enforcement. So basically, person in charge of the robotaxi rules in the Golden State. We got Instacart's head of product, John Adams. We always bring together like the delivery bigwigs. This is our first time getting someone from Instacart. Uber's head of grocery and retail partnerships, Beryl Sanders. Again, kind of talking about how do we move more than just restaurant stuff on these platforms. And then Forbes' Alan Owensman. We love our journalist. He's a big time thinker about how people and cars and goods move around cities. So, and obviously many more than that. People from Starship and restaurants and software, all the kind of fun stuff. I don't know, Greg, you've been, I think you understand that we try and bring a little milieu that speaks to the entire mix that's consuming our curbs.
It is a good time. I am sorry to miss it this year. I will instead be in Riyadh, maybe, hosting the Leap conference. I'll be running their track on smart cities, mobility, and GovTech. So the difference between Herbivore and Leap this year, Jonah, is that you will be hosting panels on drones, and we will be hosting panels on drone interceptors. So there you go.
Oof.
That's geopolitics 2026.
You just can't get enough Riyadh these days, can you?
No one can. Ask everyone fleeing Dubai in SUV convoys. We can talk a lot about the innovative mobility solutions that has been seen in the Gulf as of late.
Heavy. Hey, Athena.
I know. Just it interferes there.
Well, let's, without getting too bogged down in war, because who's got time for that?
All I know is electric vehicles, man. They might come in handy when you lose 20 million barrels of output per day when the Straits of Hormuz are closed.
Why be playing 4D chess when you can play 1D chess, Greg? It's a single point. Anyways, let's get to the news. Flink raised $100 million. I love this one. It's such a retro headline. Remember when companies with idiotic names would raise like $1 trillion to give you toothpaste in 3 minutes? Well, they're back.
We are so back.
So Berlin-based Flink kind of seems like they're the last quick commerce player standing on their own independent legs. Raised $100 million, about a $900 million valuation. Pretty meaty, but that's about a third of its peak in 2021. And was led by Prosus, which is also invested in iFood, Just Eat Takeaway, Delivery Hero. So obviously they're bullish on the sector. And what I really liked was that one of the co-investors was British American Tobacco's venture arm. And I think that really speaks to what do people need, in 15 minutes? They need their vape cartridge. That's an addictive thing that when the red light starts blinking, you smash that button on your phone.
Well, again, I mean, it is funny to see quick commerce trying to mount a comeback here in a time of tight money and now, warfare. But again, not to take all roads back to Dubai, but, the spiritual heart of 15-minute quick commerce delivery is like Talabat in the UAE, which is, again, particularly useful when you're riding out, Iranian missile attacks in your penthouse there in the middle of Dubai. So
let someone else bring you
a guest
dinner.
worker. Bring that on over, that ice cream and vape.
Well, one thing I do think is interesting is that they said their average basket size is now 45 euros. So it's no longer just someone saying, I want a banana for $1 and there's no way you can make money on this. Like $45, that's enough margin that you might be able to make this work, obviously. So, goodbye to Getir, goodbye to Gorillas, but Flink, you'll always have Flink. Anyways, moving on to another delivery story. So Uber Eats and Avride. Avride is a AV company that's got both sidewalk bots and a full-size, Hyundai robotaxi. But this time, thinking about the robot for delivering stuff, it's entered Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. It's their 4th U.S. city. And I got to say, do you think they did their homework, Greg? What happened last time a robot entered Philadelphia?
I was going to say, the last time we had a robot enter Philadelphia, that was the late lamented Hitchbot, which people recall. If you recall a time when the internet was cute, that was the robot that basically, in a test of social trust, sort of moved its way across North America. Yeah, exactly. It took about, 2 days to enter Philadelphia and be completely annihilated?
It had received nothing but accolades and hugs across Canada and Europe, and then it enters America's Northeast and The same way they got to grease up poles if the Eagles win a game. You got to
Philly's just
guard your robots better in Philadelphia.
Philly's just built different, but the joke that really that we got to make here is can you program it, hire it to basically guard your parking space in times of snow? Like winter is ending here, but can I just book it to sit in that parking spot until I can bring my car? Lawn chairs, very passe. Get me a very large delivery robot that is harder to haul away.
Chop the wheels off. It's basically guarding your spot, and that's fair. And Hitchbot, for those who don't remember, it was beheaded. So that makes me think, speaking of beheadings, political polarization in this country.
Quite the transition there, Jonah. Quite the transition.
How do people feel about AVs?
Well, I bring this up. There's a great essay here. Brian Raymer was right about this. The sense of, America, Athena here, just like watching, America burn down here on both sides here. The Brits keep their noses clean in all things here. This conversation and in geopolitics. Noted here that, America's true great, national pastime is culture war. So, even, demonstrably good technologies like EVs, I can't wait for the next cycle after all these automakers, Stellantis and everybody else, canceling their EV programs, going back to like Hemi engines and giant trucks. And now we've got, minimum $90 a barrel Brent crude right now. So we'll see the whole wave come back. But EVs were massively polarized and became part of that culture war. And there was this essay by Brian Raymer asking basically are AVs destined to be the same? And partly because the economics of AVs would tend to favor urban levels of density, cities. So you can do this, and so we can see how it becomes emblematic, which is of course also interesting with given the techlash there. We'll see how that plays out. But I do think it's interesting. This is part of course the larger mounting backlash towards AI, not just the data centers, but AI coming here. The Republican pollster who's been around a million years doing these kinds of things noted a recent NBC poll, actually now one of his own, that the net negatives of AI, the only thing are worse than President Trump and ICE. And then the only thing that's better than is the Democrats nationally and Iran. Iranian AI would probably be the most dangerous thing in the world to American voters right now, but we'll see. Yeah. Iranian AI backed by the Democrats.
So what's the difference?
Exactly.
Well, a couple things that this makes me think of. One, I'd be curious if, at least on the AV, how it polls, when Elon did his dark turn and kind of became MAGA, I wonder if did that bring the numbers together in some way, make Republicans like it a little bit more and Democrats a little bit less?
We'll have to see that polling. Well, I think it's going to become the question of how these things are culturally coded. I don't know how delivery bots play into this too, but it's all about, individual.
I don't think red states know about delivery bots.
Well,
yet.
Individual self-aggrandizement. So definitely the Mad Max mode on Tesla, that is very red state coded. But the idea of we must adopt universal AVs to avoid pedestrian and vehicle deaths, that's very left coded, or how red states would see that. This nanny state, kind of thing that we just simply can't have. I don't know. We'll see how this plays out. Let's get a consultancy to go there. Let's pay for this podcast, Jonah, with our own DC polling and lobbying firm. Let's do it.
I did see there was another related poll where it was sort of how much do you trust your neighbor, or think your neighbor's a good person? And America was basically dead last on that.
Well,
and
yeah,
everyone on Twitter was like,
Americans...
it's because of suburbs and blah, blah, blah. And then if you look, actually, Canada was number 1 or 2. So it's it's not the built form. It's that we've just been training ourselves to hate each other for a couple decades now.
I mean, if you guys aren't polarized,
anyway, what's the point of life if you're not politically polarized? But yeah, let's moving on to another pleasant topic. So Uber expand women preferences nationwide, which is sort of the toggle you have if you're a women rider to opt for a woman driver. And so it's now nationwide in the U.S. They've sort of slowly rolled it out across the across the world. And it was first introduced in Saudi Arabia in 2019, which was the year that women were granted the right to drive. Headlines from the past. And I think this segues nicely into International Women's Day. So Athena, what's that?
What's International Women's Day? Well, good thing you're asking a woman who can be a woman driver and a woman ride hailer too. And by the way, Greg, maybe do bear in mind when you're in
This
Riyadh,
modern world,
women have only been driving for 6 years there, but by the by. International Women's Day, well, it rolls around once a year on the 8th of March, which was on Sunday. And as you may also encounter, perhaps, as a bit of a media storm usually of companies talking about the wonderful initiatives that they have started to make women feel more included and more accepted. I personally will get a PR storm of women being offered as interview candidates for me on this one special day. So we personally decided to go in a slightly different direction, maybe not relegate all of women's achievements to one day in the mobility sector. So at Zag Daily, we decided to actually write more of a sort of think piece about the experience of being a woman journalist, and covering a very, very male-dominated sector, and generally the transport workforce, which is over 80% male. So yeah, we've just kind of been writing about our experiences this year. It's a bit more of a vulnerable look into what it is to be a woman and to write about mobility.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when you say that it's 80% male workers, is that like bus drivers, or is that people in corporate roles at car companies, or both?
We're talking everything here. As you may have noticed, there's quite a trend, especially at the kind of executive level, of keeping the women very much in HR and PR, which is kind of an
Mhm.
interesting experience for me as a journalist. I deal with women on a daily basis, almost, the women who work in PR, and yet most executive roles are held by men. The very large majority are held by men. So you're quoting men on a daily basis. You're kind of crediting everything to men, and yet there are obviously women. They just tend to get relegated to certain roles, and it doesn't seem to be changing all too rapidly.
And to tie it back to the Uber thing, I'd say also, I would imagine with a lot of those frontline roles, if it's a bus driver, taxi driver, obviously the risk of passenger assault is much higher if you're a woman, which is, of course, terrible. And so in a way, that women preference thing, that's as much for the driver's safety as it is for the passenger's safety, I'd have to imagine. So
I would agree.
you gotta hope a better world is possible one day. So I appreciate that Zag passes the Bechdel test.
It's got to be the first mention of the Bechdel test on this podcast there, Jonah. Way to show
Whenever
the
we
detail.
yeah, ding, ding, ding.
But does it? We just asked the woman on the podcast to talk about women's issues, Jonah. I'm pretty sure
Well,
it's
I'm
not
not saying the
spirit of
podcast does. I'm
Bechdel
saying
test.
their website does. So,
All right.
yeah, we're
Well, it is interesting. I forget off the top of my head, which I should have done more prep, but it is interesting to see Uber adopt this on a global basis when there have been a lot of innovative programs in India and elsewhere in the global south of dealing exactly these kind of gender violence issues of creating, totally internalized women driver taxi service and these kinds of things. But yeah, to make it a matter of policy across the platform and request it is, it's, you got sometimes you do got to hand it to them.
I think they must be feeling some heat, because I will say here in Los Angeles, where we communicate via billboard, there are a lot of billboards that currently have like a big, like every 7 or 8 minutes, an Uber passenger is sexually assaulted. And so I sense there must be some
I was going to say,
campaign.
I hope their next step is to then, address the backlog that's been documented over the last decade or so about, the incredible number of complaints about sexual harassment and assault in Uber and various reports that they were under address. So yeah, still work to be
That's where
done. To say
Waymo
the
comes in.
least.
Waymo will use
I
that
know.
to
What are
their
these
own.
other
Waymo comes
arguments for
in.
Waymo? Well,
I
there's a question for you, Athena. So be from purely personal perspective, would you feel more or less safe in a Waymo? Because I imagine that many women will, and again, this is your expertise on being a woman yourself, but will feel unsafe as well too, because you are vulnerable. I would imagine, at stoplights, et cetera. There, this idea that you are sitting in a sitting duck potential target kind of thing. I wonder. I'd love to see some polling on that, actually.
Yeah, I mean, Uber does have safety features, which I've been using for a while. And I would say, I think personally, I probably haven't felt this acute sense of concern, but I can understand how that would happen. Ultimately, you don't really know who the driver is. They don't have the same licenses as like a bus driver or a train driver. Whether Waymo would necessarily make me feel much safer, I don't know. I guess if you're alone in a car and you can lock all the doors, but I think there's other concerns. If you're, for example, worried about going into your house to your front door and there's maybe someone a bit dodgy on the street, or in London, I'm often in the position where I'm getting picked up late at night and I need to ask the Uber driver to come somewhere really specific so that I don't have to walk past someone looking a bit kind of sketchy on the street. I think you lose out on some of that too, so probably worth noting. But I actually had a question for you guys on this, which is, what do you think of this kind of class action suit now that's saying prioritizing women who only make up, I think, 1/5 of Uber's drivers is actually discriminatory against men?
I had missed that one, but that sounds emblematic of America in 2026.
It's
Some
always remember
conservative
that.
grifters has got their way to become, Secretary of Labor.
Better things are not possible. That's really the mantra of the United States and the year of our Lord 2026. So they're doing their best to make sure that things don't get better. So there you are.
It's
Well,
USA,
speaking
so
of
as long as you're legit
getting
to
better, what about air taxis? Athena, what's going on with air
Yes.
taxis?
Because
Well,
nothing,
we're
nothing, yeah, leave your problems behind and everyone else. Yes.
I hate to say it myself, but that brings us right back to the US again. I so wish I could talk about Europe sometimes, but the US government has been advancing its eVTOL integrated pilot program, bit of a mouthful, but it's selected 8 projects across, I think, 26 states for its project to integrate electric air taxis. It's a sort of nationwide initiative to test how air taxis and other forms of advanced mobility can operate in the USA. It first started from an executive order called Unleashing American Drone Dominance, which was Donald
Hmm.
Trump's big stand against China. No more Chinese drones, only American drones. Unleash the dominance. We just keep winning and winning and winning. No more winning, and that's what's led us here. But it does push the American kind of AAM market forward quite quickly. I think there's been a lot of concern. I don't know if this has come across on your side, but there's been a lot of concern that America's lagging behind Asia, especially also parts of Europe when it comes to innovation, kind of accelerating its programs on the aerospace side, especially electric aerospace and defense. So I think this will definitely bring air taxis into American airspace a bit faster now that the FAA is very much standing behind it.
And one thing that I found interesting was that, as you mentioned, it's 26 states, and it's not just red states. So you might think Trump admin, 26 states, they're all going to be conservative, but it's a pretty mixed bag. So yes, you have your Texas and Floridas in there, but you also have your California, Oregon, Washington, New York, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Massachusetts. So seemingly a lot of states with sort of aerospace legacy, I suppose. So air taxis are coming for all of us, whether we like it or not.
I think
I
it's
say, I
worth
just wish,
remembering that increasingly aerospace, electric aerospace, is really overlapping with defense a lot. So to me, it kind of makes sense that red states would now be in favor of it, even if they weren't kind of 5 years ago, because you've got so much money coming from companies like Anduril Industries now being poured into air taxis that you can't really see it as this clean green, aviation alternative anymore. I think it's really becoming all about warfare now.
Dual use, same as it ever were.
Well,
Well, okay, a final piece that I think it's going to really unite the Europeans and the Americans and the Canadians on this chit chat. So my World Cup runneth over. It's what, 3 months away? Do you guys use months in Europe? What kind of what's your measurement system for time over
how
there?
many fortnights?
Sorry, when you use the Mayan calendar, you guys wouldn't know about that because you have no history.
Well, what I like about this is that all the host cities are finally revealing what their plans for dealing with the surge of spectator traffic is going to be across North America. Most of them, surprise, the answer is buses, but a couple interesting improvements. So Foxborough near Boston opened a new upgraded commuter rail system. Mexico City's reminding the world that you actually can build new transportation. So they inaugurated a new rail line from the tertiary airport and have added some rolling stock to the light rail that's near like Estadio Azteca. So more Aztec than Mayan, Athena, but thank you. And then here in sunny Los Angeles, we've got a bunch of express bus service from kind of outlying stations to SoFi Stadium. And one thing that I did like seeing was that the LA Metro is using demand pricing for the parking lot. So instead of being $5-10 as usual, it's going to be up to $120 if you want to park and then take the bus on a game day. So someone's paying attention to the market. Happy to see that.
Opportunity.
How does Canada get any host games, Greg?
We have a few. Well, this is the whole politics of this is just endlessly fascinating, right? Canada's got a few games in Toronto and Vancouver. Montreal, where I'm at, wisely said, "No way. We're still paying off our Olympic Stadium from 1976." So we took a pass on that. But yeah, the memes they create themselves and they only get darker here in the sense of like, what happens when the Europeans discover, giant parking lots around Arrowhead and Kansas City and Foxborough. If Foxborough might cancel its games unless they get $8 million in security spending. So they're worried, of course, about that as well.
I would pay good money for Athena to go to Arlington, Texas and figure out how to get there without a car. Like
Which I would have.
that would be good first person journalism. Yeah. Like
So
we
that's
could
next
like
on my list.
back in the day, I think they had Via had a demand responsive transit pilot there too, so maybe they have some stuff there. But yes, the irony here of President Trump, and his various ways of governing here, of threatening various blue state cities here, of stripping the games as he's already done. So yeah, the idea of taking them from transit rich cities and then assigning even more of them to the middle of nowhere is also a prospect. But it is very funny for me. I took my boys to, I think I mentioned this before in the pod, to Italy last fall for their fall break, and yes, going to San Siro by the Milan train system, which handles 70,000 fans, like it can be done. These European fans are going to show up for France, Senegal or France, Norway in Foxborough and find nothing there except the commuter system. Yeah, it's going to be quite the culture shock, among other culture
I will
shocks.
say, I feel like, you see this whenever there's a big international sporting event, and it's like, how are we going to deal with it? But obviously, they managed to fit, 100,000 American football fans into Arlington every weekend, right? It's not like this is some unimaginable feat. A sport fan is a sport fan. They occupy the same amount of space. The European one's probably slightly smaller, actually. But yeah, they're going to rent cars and they're going to sit in traffic and they're going to learn what it's like to be a red-blooded American. Gosh darn it.
Gosh darn it. Will there at least be healthy food options, or is part of the fun eating plenty of GMOs and fried things?
I think
I
crappy
say,
stadium
Athena,
food is the world over, Athena.
I disagree. Given the prices of World Cup tickets over $1,000 a head on resale, I bet it's going to be caviar and foie gras being served in the upper tiers of Cherry World or Foxborough. Yeah. I would say this will also be, of course, the greatest spectacle of American inequality. So, it's going to be great.
Hot dogs for Z.
Right in time for the
caviar for
250th
me.
anniversary of America. It's going to be quite the season finale.
Well, I think the transit shenanigans for the World Cup, it's a perfect segue for me to talk with Michael Steiner about how do you build a constituency for more public transit. And we're back. Today we're joined by Michael Schneider, founder and chief executive officer of Streets for All. Hey, Michael.
How's it going, Jonah?
It's great. It's always fun when we get to talk a little bit about policy, about creating a better world, a place we actually want to live and inhabit. And that's something you've been at the forefront of. I don't want to do the introduction. Why don't you tell us, what's a Street for All?
A street for all is a street that is multimodal and everybody can use regardless of the mode of transportation. Streets for All, the organization, is fighting to make that a reality across Los Angeles and actually across California with our state work. We don't think you should have to risk your life to ride a bike. We don't think you should have to risk your life to cross a street as a pedestrian. And we're trying to make policy changes and on-the-ground changes to make that a reality.
And if I can make a bold editorial statement, I think that's something that this show agrees with too. I think seems like a no-brainer when you say it out loud. Streets really should be for everyone and they should be safe for all users. Like, why is that so complicated? But because the world we live in, that is kind of complicated.
It's very complicated. LA 100 years ago had the best rail system in the world, and it wasn't complicated. The streets were truly multimodal. You might have a horse and a car and a streetcar and a bike and everything else. But today, most North American cities are just designed around cars. And what happens when you design cities only around maximum driver convenience, you essentially push all the other modes to the side. And public transportation becomes unreliable and inconvenient, and biking and walking become death-defying exercises, and then everybody or most people feel forced into a car just to survive. So that's currently the status quo. I'm born and raised in LA. I went car-free over 10 years ago. I just use a bicycle to get around town. And when I tell people that, a lot of people just kind of ask me if I'm okay. Like, it sounds crazy. And it would have sounded crazy to me if you told me 15 years ago I was going to live that way. That would have sounded crazy to me. But even with our non-infrastructure city, mostly non-infrastructure city, I'm never in traffic. I never have to look for parking. It's a surprisingly delightful way to live. And so now I'm just on a mission to not die, number one, just getting to where I need to go.
Great.
And number two, to build a city where my kids could get around on a bicycle without me having to worry for their safety.
And I think you're absolutely right in the sense that when you're on a bike and it's going, doesn't have to be going great, but it's going well enough that you're not fearing for your life in a place like LA, it feels great. The wind, the sun, cruising down the street, like it's such a no-brainer. Like, aha, like this is pretty nice. It's better than traffic. And when the infrastructure is actually there to make it, heaven forbids, you're often faster than a car would be, and you arrive in a good mood. And then just for listeners out there that don't know Michael and what a true believer you are, you bike to the airport, right?
Guilty. I bike to the airport. I've been biking to the airport now for about 8 years. again, it's one of those things. I just kept kind of pulling the string. Oh, I'll go a mile away and then 2 miles and 3 miles. And I kept seeing how far I could go on the bike and have it feel reasonable. And then when I got my electric cargo bike, which is my main bike I use when I take my kids around or when I'm going around and not biking for just exercise, I realized that the city is actually, everyone assumes it's so big and so sprawled out. And with an e-bike, it's actually not. The airport, I live near Melrose and La Brea. The airport from my house is 50 minutes, maybe 55 if I get unlucky at lights, regardless of the time of day, rush hour, not rush hour, etc. If I were to take an Uber or a Lyft to the airport, I would say the time would range anywhere from, if you're really lucky, maybe at like 4 a.m, 35 minutes to well over an hour, because the horseshoe is so unpredictable and you might get within, half mile of your gate and then just be stopped. But the great thing about biking to LAX is you're allowed to use the inner horseshoe where it's bus only, but they allow bikes. And so you can literally just fly past any traffic that's there. And it's lovely. And I will say, after being on a long flight, getting on a bike and moving also feels great.
Yeah, get the blood flow restored to the legs. No, and I think in a way that kind of like speaks to the sort of misunderstand promise and challenge of LA. Like the airport in a way is like very urban. Like it's sort of like you have a bunch of buildings and all of a sudden just the airport starts. And yeah, LA is all these sort of polycentric pockets of density that are now better connected by transit than they once were. But it's just sort of like that messy intersection between things where you'll have a bike lane for a little bit and then it stops, or you'll have like good transit and then it stops. Trying to make the city, or the microcosm of the city, is a little bit more cohesive. I feel like that's part of the grand challenge. So let's get into like what inspired you to make Streets for All. Like, what was the aha moment where you thought, let's do advocacy?
So before I had kids, I would be biking and a car would honk at me or pass me unsafely or do things that drivers sometimes do. And I would get frustrated, but I would just kind of move on. It turned into moments full of kind of blind rage when I had one of my daughters on the bike with me and a driver would do that. And that caused me to ask questions. Why do I live in a city with some of the best weather in the world and it has some of the worst biking infrastructure? Why are cities with way worse weather, where it's raining half the time and cold and all sorts of other conditions, and they have 50, 60% of the population using a bicycle for their daily trips? And I went down this rabbit hole. I learned that 50% of all trips every day in LA are 3 miles or less, 66% 5 miles or less. Another way to say that is if everybody chose to ride a bike for 15 minutes or less, you could get half the cars you see off the road every day, which is staggering. But the truth is, we don't need everybody to bike or to not use a car. They could use the bus, they could use the train, they could walk. We just need a small percentage of the population to shift, to have a dramatic shift in road safety, the way the streets feel, less traffic, reduced parking demand, cleaner air, etc. And the way you get that shift is by changing infrastructure. So when I started Streets for All, I did it out of frustration. Every other advocacy group in LA was a 501c3. They could not tell you who to vote for, and they couldn't be political. And the problem was a political problem. We needed our city council and our mayor to want the stuff, to fund it, to advocate for it. And there was only 1 out of 15 when I started Streets for All that cared at all about this issue. Most politicians assumed no one wants bike lanes, no one cares, this is a losing political battle, I'm not going to spend political capital on it. Today, there are 7 sitting council members that Streets for All has endorsed. Adrien Azarian has been very bike-friendly lately. We didn't endorse him, but if you count him, there's 8 out of 15 that are very bike-friendly, transit-friendly, want to build a walkable city. And the politics have changed. We passed Measure HLA in 2024. It was a massive multi-year, multi-million-dollar effort. And all of a sudden, the political calculation of nobody wants this stuff and nobody cares became, oh my God, 2/3 of voters voted for a measure that mandates the city of LA put in safer streets over time. So we kind of
And this,
shifted that
for people that don't know, this is basically forcing the city to implement its own mobility plan that it had said it wanted to do, but then just couldn't do.
Yeah, I was naive when I started Streets for All. I'm like, oh, the city council passed a mobility plan. I looked at the plan. I'm like, this is really cool. It's got bike lanes and bus lanes and crosswalks and all sorts of good stuff for everybody in here. And then I sunk into a depression when I realized that it was not mandatory and that it was mostly being ignored. And it was a politician's tool and a way to stand up at a podium and say, we're building a better city without doing anything. So yeah, Measure HLA, it's now illegal for the city to repave or work on a street and not put in whatever the mobility plan calls for that street.
So I want to get to implementation in a bit, but first, for people listening in thinking like, I like the sound of that, I want to bring that to my town. What's it like, building a winning coalition? How do you get people on board? How do you obviously it was many years from forming Streets for All before getting this ballot measure on the books and voted for. So like, what are the practical steps from going from zero to, voters approved?
It's not easy. It's a pain in the ass and it's expensive in big cities. So I'll caveat
Sure.
that. If you live in a smaller city or a mid-sized city, this math could be completely different. In our case, we needed 15% of the last mayoral election, which at the time was 2017. And so we had to collect and turn in 65,000 signatures, and they had to be valid signatures. So you always have to overcompensate for people that move or aren't actually registered to vote, et cetera. So we had to turn in about 100,000 signatures. We started with volunteers and thought, we did the math and we're like, if everybody just works an hour a day for 4 months and just collects 11 signatures a day, it doesn't have to be an hour, it could be half an hour, but collects 11 signatures a day, we had 80 volunteers, we'll easily make the number.
Easily.
Unfortunately, after a few weeks, people get busy at work and people have family issues and life happens, and there's a huge drop off. So ultimately, we went to paid signature gatherers. I would say the hardest part of doing a major ballot measure in a big city is finding people to back you financially. It takes money. When we did it, it took about $10 per signature. That's what it took to get a valid signature. Today, that number is probably closer to 15 or even 20, depending on where. So you've got to get good at raising money and telling the story of why this matters. Polling helps. Doing a poll, there's sort of DIY polls you could do online for less money. Typical political poll could be $10,000, $20,000, $30,000. But if you have a poll that shows voters agree with what you want and it will pass if it makes it to the ballot, then it becomes easier to raise money because people feel like it's not a lost cause. The last thing I'll say is the city council, any city council, can also place things on the ballot. So you don't have to go out and collect signatures. If you have enough political support at council to do something, you can have them place it on the ballot. Or better yet, if you have enough political support, just have them pass an ordinance to do what you want.
Sure.
And that would have been way easier. But because
save
the city
some
of LA,
steps, save some money. Yeah.
it saves everything. But you need to have the political will, and we did not have the political will in the city council.
And in terms of fundraising, are these just sort of like-minded individuals that want to see a better world? Or they're kind of like larger check writers you can get behind a movement like this?
When I started Streets for All, I started to look for, so I'm a tech entrepreneur. I've started 4 startups over the last 20 years. That's what I know how to do. And when I started Streets for All, I kind of approached it in the same way. And I started looking for people that had deeper pockets and that cared about this issue for one reason or another. And what I was able to find is a few high net worth individuals that really cared. They weren't doing it because they were going to profit off of it some way. They were doing it because they wanted to ride their bike around the city and not die. And that's the same way I felt. And so they were very motivated. After, I'll say this, we didn't start with a ballot measure. We started by politely asking council offices to implement the city's already adopted mobility plan when they repave streets. And we thought asking would be enough, and maybe 1 out of every 20 times they did it. Most of the time we were ignored or told there aren't resources, or we're not going to make the trade-offs. We're not going to remove the parking that would require. We're not going to remove the travel lane that would require. And so we realized that actually it'd be a blessing in disguise if there was a law mandating it, because then the politicians could be innocent. It's not our fault. We're sorry, but the voters wanted this.
Yeah.
So that's why we went that direction.
Well, so I think that's kind of interesting, right? Like you got the law passed, you've got a majority on the city council, and I wish I could say I look outside and it's now a mobility paradise out there where every street is pristinely maintained with great bike lanes. But obviously, this city's had a few punches to the gut lately. But why can't we actually just get this shit done?
Well, it's interesting. When I started Streets for All, the biggest problem was political will. When we finally managed to get the political will through the ballot measure, but also through having successful elections and backing the right people that won, all of a sudden the city was in a huge financial crisis. And it's basically been in a financial crisis now for a couple of years. I will say part of the financial crisis is of our own making. The city gave raises to civil servants, LAPD, LAFD, with zero plan to pay for them. I'm not saying the raises weren't deserved, but I think when you give a raise, you should have a plan to pay for the raise, and we didn't. And so we've kind of lurched from fiscal crisis to fiscal crisis every single year in the city of LA for the last 3 years. The city council has started with a massive budget deficit that they've had to plug because by law, cities have to have balanced budgets. I think last year it was $1 billion hole. This year might be $500 million. I guess that's getting better, but it's still $500 million. So long story short, the money, the political will was there, but the money just wasn't and isn't. And so the city is barely doing anything. And it's not because of HLA, it's actually because of federal curb ramp requirements under the Americans for Disabilities Act. And it mandates that when you redo a street, you have to put in curb ramps or you have to upgrade the curb ramps to modern standards. The city of LA is somehow, I still don't understand how this is possible, spending up to $200,000 per corner or up to $800,000 per intersection on these ramps. And so it doesn't take very, you don't have to be a mathematician to realize that if you do a project that's half a mile long, you might need $5 or $7 million just for the curb ramps. And the math just doesn't work. The city doesn't have the money.
Yeah. And that one baffles my mind because obviously like other cities have these same federal requirements. They figure out how to do it. My little silver bullet I want anyone listening to think about is doing bulb outs. So instead of having to jackhammer the old sidewalk, you can just kind of push it out and it has other obviously daylighting benefits for the crosswalk. But no, I think it also gets to this larger question about state capacity, right? Like a government that knows how to do things doesn't just outsource it to contractors that then don't have skin in the game. Obviously, charter reform is kind of an interesting topic there that, hopefully can point us back in that right direction. But how do we make institutions that work so that voters entrust them to do more and are happy with the results?
I think a few things have to happen. We are going through a charter reform process, the first time in over 20 years. We don't have a fully formed LADOT, Department of Transportation. What I mean by that is it wasn't formed by the charter, it's formed by council, and they can't do concrete work or asphalt work. And so you go to a city like New York City, NYDOT is responsible from property line to property line. They can do sidewalks, they can do curbs, they can do ramps, they can do asphalt, they can do anything they need to do in the public right of way. Our DOT can't. Our city gave DOT control over the way the streets are used, but it gave the Bureau of Engineering and the Bureau of Street Services control over asphalt and concrete. And so what that means is we have a very bureaucratic, not very functional system where one department is focused on road safety and multimodal streets. Another department just cares about pavement condition, doesn't care about anything multimodal. And they're trying to coexist and they're trying to get priorities for resources. So it's a very dysfunctional system. We could fix that in the charter. So far, I haven't seen the political will to do it. But DOT and Streets LA should be merged, I think, under LADOT. So DOT can actually do work in the public right of way, property line to property line. That would be a proper Department of Transportation that would have full control over the public right of way and would result in better, cheaper, faster projects.
Yeah. Well, and while we're at it, a actual capital plan and expanded city council, all sorts of goodies. And then maybe we can get it so that when the city adds crosswalks, it doesn't take another year to turn on the crossing lights.
I don't know if I used to think we do need an expanded city council. I'm like, this hasn't changed in 100 years. It's crazy. So many people represented by so few. But then when I thought about it, if the bureaucracy in the machine isn't working well, and your solution is to just have more pieces of the pie a part of the same machine, in a way, you're making the problem worse. And also, in our current system, council members have veto authority over land use decisions, still over transportation decisions in certain cases. And so instead of having to convince 2 or 3 council members, because a project goes through a few districts, you might have to convince 7 or 8. In a way, it makes a lot of the problems worse. I don't know if an expanded city council is the silver bullet.
I suppose I should say commensurate with that would be, I think, disempowering the council members' prerogative and making for a stronger mayor system. So there's actually like a single
Depends
point of
on who the mayor,
accountability.
but yes, that could be a good idea.
Sure. I mean, yes, all this depends on there being, the right people in charge, obviously. Well, I think sort of final, broad topic, you hinted at this, but you've had like a, let's say, non-traditional path to running this organization. You're sort of a startup tech guy. I share some of those background interests with you. We spent a couple of years together on the very frustrating Greater Wilshire Transportation Committee, just bashing our head against people fighting crosswalks. So, like, give us your career arc, if you could, and how it landed where you are.
I have been a tech nerd since I was 5 years old, and my parents got me my first computer. I started a company in high school selling video games and then started building websites at the first dot-com boom. That became a design agency. I started a Facebook for Moms when Facebook was still just for college students in 2007. I had a company called Mobile Roadie that let anyone make a mobile app with no code. We started in music. At our peak, we powered Madonna, Taylor Swift, Katy Perry, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, a whole bunch of great names. And after that, I had a company called Service that saved you money when you traveled. So you'd connect your Gmail. If your flight was delayed or canceled, we would get you compensation. So I've done all these different things in software. And I do think that helped with advocacy. Because of my design agency background, I really cared about our branding and I cared that things looked pretty. I cared about messaging. I think a lot of times advocates and also governments are very guilty of this. They will put together a presentation that's kind of boring to look at and very wordy, and then they will just show slides and read off the slides to the audience. It's like the most boring way to present information. And a lot of community meetings are like that, and you just lose people. If you want to get masses, you have to be good at mass marketing and communication. And so tried to focus a lot on that. And I think my experience with raising money for tech companies probably helped in raising money for this. It's a very different proposition. I'm not promising to go public one day. I'm promising to maybe make it so, your kid doesn't die trying to bike to the grocery store. So it's a very different value proposition and very different ways that people judge your success. I'll end on saying that we do a lot of work in Sacramento, and it's become clear that sometimes going to the state is actually a quicker way to fix cities than going city by city. The state keeps pulling back land use authority from cities and getting really strict. We were behind one of the co-sponsors of SB 79 last year to build more housing near transit. We had another bill a couple years ago to try to use a combination of carrots and sticks to reward cities that were reducing fatalities on their streets and punish cities that were having it get worse. But anyway, we do a lot of work in Sacramento too. And so I also think the speed of the startup world and the business world is something that I brought to the advocacy world. And a lot of people, no one in government's in a hurry. Like, everyone operates like no one's ever going to die. And I think that needs to change. But as an advocate, you have to balance your impatience for results with government speed. But there are certain pressure points you can push on to even get governments to move a lot faster. And so, that's kind of the arc.
Perfect. Well, let's see, 1,000 streets for all bloom across the country. Michael, thanks so much for chatting with us.
Thanks, John.